starting in the 1980s. Lots and lots of housing developments were built. And yes, we have fabulous developments happening on the waterfront down on the easterly end. We have harbourfront in the middle. Thousands of people come to the waterfront every year. This airport doesn't fit anymore. Our waterfront can be even more of a place for people to come to enjoy, to come to play, to come to work than it is now. But the biggest impediment we have is this airport. With this out of the way, we move forward, and we move forward with imagination, we move forward with creativity, we move forward with excitement. That doesn't happen until this is gone. The tripartite agreement is essentially a lease from the City of Toronto. Part of the lands that the airport occupies are owned by the city, and the city has leased them to the Port Authority. And it only terminates when the airport actually is finally shut down. And although the criteria that were set out in the Canada Marine Act for port authorities weren't met at all by this particular port, Toronto was included as a port authority under the Canada Marine Act. Now, those criteria included that the port has to be self-sufficient and remain self-sufficient. If this port loses millions of dollars every year, requires an immense amount of money to subsidize it. Taxpayer money, taxpayers' assets. So there's no accountability. There's no, obviously, desire on the part of these people they've appointed to be accountable back to the people of Toronto and people who use this waterfront, who live here, who work here. The tripartite agreement was negotiated in the 1980s. And it contains a number of clauses for the protection of this local community. One of those clauses that says that we're going to let some commercial service happen out of this airport, but only for short takeoff and landing planes. And that's the limit. We'll crack open the tripartite agreement enough to allow that kind of service. Porter and the Toronto Port Authority are ignoring that restriction and jamming into this airport the Q400, which is not permitted. It's not a slow plane. It's simply not permitted. This plane, the Q400, is by definition a plane creating excessive noise and is banned from this airport. So what do we do about that? We raise it with the Port Authority. We raise it with their board of directors. We raise it with Porter. They've refused to acknowledge the issue. We raise it with the federal government, with Transport Canada. They so far have refused to deal with the issue. The noise, the fumes disturb everybody who live, work, and play on this waterfront. It isn't clean when you get jet fumes and known carcinogens being spewed out by these airplanes. Short-haul flights are particularly bad, far worse than even driving the same distance in an SUV. More and more, I hear people I know and people I work with in the Bathurst Key community are disturbed by the airport. They're disturbed by the noise, they're disturbed by the fumes, they're disturbed by the traffic. Their peaceful neighborhood is disappearing all too quickly. We need to find ways to get the politicians, we need to find ways to get the federal government to enforce those noise regulations, because they're there for the protection of the community. A community right that we need to enforce. Well, interestingly, we've written to Transport Canada and said, so what is it about this airport that you insist it has to stay open? It's not safe. It doesn't meet international standards. The runway safety areas at the end of the runways is far too short. Even Pearson's are too short. They were criticized after the Air France crash at Peason. But these ones are even shorter. And these runways just dump people off or dump planes off if they overshoot the runway right into the water. The rescue problems are horrific. There's a long list of hazards for pilots to be careful of. The high rises around here, the wind turbine over at X Place, the fact that there's a bird sanctuary just off the end of the runway over there. This airport has had far more bird strikes than any of the airports that Porter flies into. This airport isn't necessary for emergencies. In fact, the helicopters that bring people in, the air ambulance helicopters, don't come back here with people. Once they pick up someone who's severely injured or sick, they take them directly to the hospital. The helicopter pads on the top of St. Mike's, on the top of the sick kids, that's where they go. Emergencies, this has nothing to do with them. So if they've got to go to Barrie or Muskoka, it's a much longer trip. They should be stationed in the middle of that area, at least in Buttonville. Sometimes people come in by plane on an air ambulance, but these are stable people who can just as easily be brought into Pearson. This airport isn't necessary for emergencies. What we really need to see is an easier way to get to Pearson. We need fast rail to Pearson, and in fact we need fast rail to Montreal, Ottawa, even New York. Flying short-haul flights makes no sense from a climate change perspective. Port Authority and Transport Canada, and certainly the politicians, and the Liberal politicians and the Conservative politicians we dealt with, most of them feel that it's an appropriate use of downtown Toronto space. Obviously, the vast majority of Torontonians and those of us who live, work, and play down here fundamentally and totally disagree. Well, one of the alternatives to the airport is expanding the park. There are thousands of people who use Centre Island in the summer months, and thousands more would come if we really expanded the park and did something wonderful there. You know, we have 215 acres here. It's probably the best place in Toronto to do something truly spectacular.